December 19th, 2001, Waldport, Oregon. A man walking his dog along the Lint Slough sees something floating in the water, something small. At first, he thinks it's a doll. But as he gets closer, his heart sinks. It's a child, a little boy. Within hours, police have a name. Zachary Longo, 4 years old, last seen with his family at their Newport condo 3 days ago. Investigators have urgent questions. Where are his parents? Where are his 2 little sisters? What they discover over the next week shocks even veteran homicide detectives. A father who chose to eliminate his entire family rather than face the consequences of his lies. Christian Longo had lived his entire adult life as a fraud, stole from his employer to buy an engagement ring, forged checks to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford, created fake identities to steal vehicles. And when his web of deception finally collapsed, when arrest warrants piled up and bankruptcy loomed, Christian made a choice. He decided his family was the problem, so he removed the obstacle, then fled to Mexico to live his fantasy life as a traveling writer, romancing a German photographer on the beaches of Cancun, while police searched for his missing wife and children. This is the story of Christian Longo, the charming Jehovah's Witness with boyish good looks who convinced everyone he was a devoted family man, and how he systematically destroyed every person who trusted him. Christian Michael Longo was born January 23rd, 1974, in Iowa. His mother Joy was a teenager when she had him. When Christian was 4, Joy left his abusive alcoholic father and remarried Joe Longo, who adopted Christian and his younger brother Dustin. Joe became a Target district manager. The family moved to Ypsilanti, Michigan, just outside Ann Arbor. Money, stability, a fresh start. Then Joy became a Jehovah's Witness. And everything changed. Jehovah's Witnesses demand total isolation from the outside world. You only associate with other witnesses. Go door-to-door proselytizing. Attend multiple meetings every week. Study the Watchtower publications religiously. Follow strict rules about everything from clothing to entertainment to who you can spend time with. If you leave or get kicked out, your family must shun you completely. No contact ever. Not phone calls, not letters, not birthday cards, nothing. This practice is called disfellowshipping, and it's designed to keep members in line through fear of total social isolation. Christian thrived in this environment, not because he believed the doctrine, but because the organization taught him to manipulate people, how to present the perfect image, how to say exactly what people wanted to hear, how to seem trustworthy and sincere while hiding your true intentions. These skills would serve him well as a con artist for the rest of his life. Christian was homeschooled from his teens forward, never attended regular school, never had normal teenage experiences, never learned how the real world worked. His entire education consisted of religious indoctrination and whatever his parents taught at home. No exposure to critical thinking, no preparation for handling adult responsibilities. Think about that. A teenager with zero real-world experience, raised in a religious bubble with no critical thinking skills. This is the person who would soon be responsible for a wife and 3 children. In 1993, 19-year-old Christian met Mary Jane Baker at the Kingdom Hall. Mary Jane was 26, a secretary at the University of Michigan Dental School. When Christian walked into her life with his charm and good looks, she thought he was the answer to her prayers. Christian's parents didn't approve. Within months, he was working at a camera shop and planning to propose, but he couldn't afford the ring. A customer put a $108 deposit on a camcorder. Christian pocketed it, made a payment on a diamond ring he'd bought on credit. His boss noticed. Christian resigned and placed a check on the counter to cover it. His boss pressed charges anyway. Christian was convicted of embezzlement. Mary Jane forgave him. He promised he'd never lie again. The organization sanctioned Christian. They couldn't marry in the Kingdom Hall. Christian convinced Mary Jane their love mattered more. They married March 13th. Christian worked for a newspaper distribution company delivering the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. Decent pay with early morning hours meant he had the rest of the day free. But Christian wanted more. Wanted to look successful, affluent. Zachary was born February 28, 1997. Sadie arrived April 30th, 1998. Mary Jane quit her job to be a full-time mother. Behind the scenes, Christian was buried in debt, credit cards maxed out, bills unpaid, living paycheck to paycheck while maintaining appearances of prosperity. He bought a Sea-Doo jet ski they couldn't afford, financed a Dodge Durango with payments he could barely make, took expensive vacations to Jamaica and Mexico on credit cards. When Sadie was born, Christian's company sent him to San Francisco for a newspaper strike. After a week, he quit, walked away because he was upset. He started selling fireplaces on commission. The pay was terrible, but he kept spending. Madison was born October 19th, 1999. 7 weeks premature with respiratory issues. Hospitalized for a month. Medical bills piled up. While Madison fought for her life in the NICU, Mary Jane's car was repossessed. Christian's biggest concern? What the neighbors might think. Not his infant daughter, just appearances. Christian saw an opportunity in construction. Contractors needed companies to clean houses after construction was done. In January 2000, Christian started Final Touch construction cleaning. The business took off, but contractors are slow to pay. Christian needed cash now, so he forged checks, used his computer to recreate checks from companies that owed him money, printed them, cashed them, rationalized it by claiming he only took what he was owed. In February 2000, he created a fake ID, drove to Ohio, drove a brand new Pontiac Montana minivan, drove off the lot with it, never returned. Mary Jane had no idea it was stolen. Christian created fake payment statements and mailed them to their house. Her religion taught complete obedience to husbands. Christian used that against her. Christian's forgery scheme worked for months, until companies started noticing money missing and traced it back to Final Touch construction cleaning. On July 14th, 2000, Christian tried to cash another forged check. The bank teller recognized something was off, called police. Christian fled but left his ID behind. Was arrested later that day. Detective Sergeant Fred Farkas questioned him. Christian calmly admitted to forging checks, showed no shame, no remorse, just matter-of-factly explained that he'd only taken amounts companies owed him, like that made it okay. He faced up to 14 years per forged check. With multiple charges, he could have spent decades in prison. Instead, he got a slap on the wrist. 3 years probation, community service, and $30,000 restitution. But the punishment from the Jehovah's Witnesses was far worse. They disfellowshipped him, kicked him out of the organization, required all active members to shun him completely. Christian's own mother, stepfather, and brother stopped speaking to him. His employees who were witnesses quit immediately. His friends vanished overnight. His entire social network disappeared. For Mary Jane, this was devastating. She'd been raised in the faith. Her entire life revolved around the organization, her family, her friends, her identity. Now she was married to someone the organization had rejected. But she stayed. Her religion taught divorce was wrong, that she needed to support her husband through trials, that this was a test of her faith. Christian convinced his adoptive father, Joe, to invest tens of thousands of dollars in expanding Final Touch. opening an Indianapolis branch. But Christian wasn't using the money to grow the business. He was using it to cover his existing debts and maintain his lifestyle. By spring 2001, Christian had burned through the entire $100,000 line of credit. Still owed $30,000 in court-ordered restitution. Owed employees and banks another $74,000. Lawsuits were piling up. Arrest warrants were being issued. The pressure was building from every direction. Christian did what he always did when cornered. He ran. In May 2001, Christian sold their house, forged documents to secure the sale, told Mary Jane not to tell anyone where they were going, not even family. They moved to Toledo, Ohio, to a warehouse with no kitchen or bathroom, just a giant empty space where a family of 5 tried to exist. Christian continued forging checks, started selling stolen construction equipment. A buyer became suspicious about a skid loader Christian was selling for $5,000 when it was worth $30,000, called police. Sergeant Paul Hickey investigated. Christian charmed his way through the questioning, but Hickey traced the equipment to its rightful owner. When he returned to the warehouse, the Longos were gone. Inside, he found a trailer, boat, and boat trailer, all stolen. The family fled across the country, living in tents, sleeping in campgrounds, ended up on the Oregon coast in September 2001. The final days, Christian rented a 3-bedroom home in Waldport for $190 per week. Was kicked out after less than a month. They moved to a cheap motel in Newport. Christian got a job at Starbucks inside Fred Meyer. Started part-time, promoted to full-time. He convinced the Landing condominiums manager to rent him a unit for $1,200 a month, something he couldn't afford. Sometime in mid-November 2001, Christian came to a conclusion. His family was preventing him from living the life he wanted. If he didn't have to support them, he could travel, be free, live without responsibilities. So he decided to solve the problem permanently. The exact sequence of events that night is known only to Christian long ago. But investigators pieced together a timeline from witness statements, evidence, and Christian's own inconsistent accounts. On the evening of December 16, 2001, Christian came home from his shift at Starbucks. Mary Jane had spent the day with the children at the condo. Zachary and Sadie had played. Madison had napped. A normal Monday in their new life on the Oregon coast. Sometime between that evening and the early morning hours of December 17th, everything changed. What Christian did that night would haunt investigators for years, not just because of what happened, but because of how calculated it was, how methodical, how completely devoid of the panic or rage that typically accompanies such tragedies. Just after 4 a.m. on December 17th, a construction worker named Mike Barker was driving along Highway 34, heading to an early shift. As he crossed the bridge over Lint Slough in Waldport, he noticed a red minivan stopped in the middle of the bridge. Hazard lights off, just sitting there in the darkness. Barker pulled over, walked back to check if the driver needed help. The man rolled down his window. Clean-cut, polite, calm. Said his check engine light had come on, but he had it handled. Everything was fine. Barker offered to call a tow truck. The man declined, said he'd be on his way in just a minute. Barker got back in his truck and drove off. Thought nothing more of it. That man was Christian Longo. And in that moment, Barker had no idea what was happening inside that van. No idea that 2 small children were in the back. No idea that he'd just spoken to a father in the middle of committing an unthinkable act. Later that same day, December 17, late afternoon, Christian was seen at the Embarcadero Marina directly across from his condo. A boat owner noticed him walking down the dock carrying two large dark green suitcases. Thought it was odd. Why would someone be loading luggage onto a boat in winter? Christian walked to the end of the dock, looked around, then lowered the suitcases into the water and walked away empty-handed. For the next 2 days, Christian continued his normal routine. Showed up for his Starbucks shifts, made small talk with co-workers, smiled at customers, acted like nothing had changed. On December 18th, employees at the motel where the Longos had previously stayed found something disturbing in their dumpster. Children's clothing, family photo albums, baby books, Mary Jane's Michigan driver's license. The employee called Christian at work. Thought maybe the family had accidentally thrown away important items. Christian's response? Casual, dismissive. Oh, the kids must have left some stuff behind. No big deal. He told co-workers a story. Said Mary Jane had been having a 3-year affair. That she'd taken the kids back to Michigan. That the marriage was over, but he was handling it fine. Nobody questioned him. He seemed so calm, so reasonable, so normal. But behind that calm exterior, Christian was already planning his escape, already fantasizing about his new life in Mexico, already erasing his family from his mind like they'd never existed. December 19th, 2001. Early morning. A man named David Johnson was walking his dog along the shore of Lint Slough. The temperature was below freezing. Frost covered everything. That's when he saw something in the water, something small, floating face down. At first, he thought it was a doll. But as he got closer, his stomach dropped. It was a child. A little boy, maybe 4 years old. Johnson called 911 immediately, his voice shaking. When police arrived, they carefully recovered the boy from the water. He was wearing only underwear. A pillowcase was tied around one ankle, weighted down with rocks. The Lincoln County Sheriff's Office couldn't identify him. They created a computerized facial reconstruction image, released it to local media. Does anyone recognize this child? Within hours, the phone rang. A woman named Denise Thompson. She'd babysat the Longo children. "That's Zachary," she said, crying. "Zachary Longo." Thompson gave police the address of Landing Condominiums in Newport. Said the family had just moved there. Investigators raced to the condo. Knocked on the door. No answer. The property manager confirmed the Longos had been renting Unit 4. But Christian had come by on December 17th and said he was taking his wife and kids to the airport. Marital problems. They were flying to Michigan. The manager had believed him. Why wouldn't he? Christian seemed so sincere. Police entered the condo, empty. The family had moved out. If Zachary was in Lint Slough, where were Sadie and Madison? Where was Mary Jane? Divers went into the freezing water near the bridge, searched through the murky depths. 3-year-old Sadie, also with a pillowcase tied to her ankle, also weighted with rocks. The medical examiner's preliminary findings were heartbreaking. The children had been alive when they entered the water. For a week, divers searched Yaquina Bay near the Landing Condominiums. The water was dark, cold, filled with debris. On December 27th, 8 days after Zachary was found, they located 2 dark green suitcases submerged near the marina dock. Inside the first suitcase was Mary Jane Longo, 34 years old, a devoted mother, a faithful wife. Inside the second was 2-year-old Madison, the baby who'd fought so hard to survive in the NICU, who'd overcome respiratory problems, who'd just started walking and forming sentences. The medical examiner determined Mary Jane had suffered trauma to her head and had been asphyxiated. Madison had also been asphyxiated. By the time investigators made these horrific discoveries, Christian Longo was living his dream life on the beaches of Cancun. He'd disposed of his family like they were obstacles to be removed. And then he'd gone on vacation. On December 21st, Christian picked up his final paycheck from Starbucks. Never showed up for another shift. He drove to Wilsonville, south of Portland, parked the stolen Montana at a Dodge dealership, removed the plates, walked into the showroom, and stole a green Dodge Durango. In San Francisco, he applied for a Starbucks job using his Newport employment as reference. When the manager called Newport, employees alerted police. But Christian was already gone. On December 26th, he bought a plane ticket to Cancun using a stolen credit card number he'd memorized from the Starbucks register. In Mexico, Christian reinvented himself as Michael Finkel, a real New York Times writer who'd been caught fabricating stories. Christian had read his work and fantasized about being a traveling journalist. He stayed in hostels, told people he was researching Mayan ruins, carried a notebook everywhere, met a German photographer named Janina, started a romantic relationship. His family had been missing less than 2 weeks. Their faces were all over American news. And Christian was living his dream life on the beaches of Cancun. No remorse, no guilt, no looking back. Christian Longo was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list on January 11, 2002. The next day, America's Most Wanted aired a segment about him. A Canadian woman who'd met Christian in Cancun recognized him. She'd noticed he introduced himself as Brad one time and Mike another. Called the FBI. Another tip came from a tour guide in Tulum. Said he'd seen Christian there the previous evening. On January 13, 2002, Mexican police and FBI agents surrounded the campground where Christian was staying, pulled him out at gunpoint. An FBI agent asked if he was Christian Michael Longo. He answered yes. He worked out a deal to voluntarily return to the United States. Christian Longo's vacation in paradise. Christian's trial began March 10, 2003, in Clackamas County Circuit Court. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Any reasonable defense attorney would advise taking a plea deal, accepting responsibility, showing remorse. Christian did the opposite. His defense strategy was shocking. He claimed Mary Jane had suffered a mental breakdown, that she'd harmed the 2 older children in a fit of psychosis. That when he came home and discovered what she'd done, he'd reacted in rage and harmed her. Then realized Madison was still breathing, so he'd made a terrible decision to spare the toddler from living with brain damage. Zero evidence supported this narrative. Mary Jane had no history of mental illness, nothing to suggest she'd suddenly become violent. But Christian testified to this story under oath for 4 full days, looking the jury directly in the eyes. His own attorneys had advised him not to take the stand. Christian insisted. He believed he could charm the jury. He was wrong. The prosecution presented a devastating counter-narrative. Christian hadn't reacted impulsively. He'd planned this for months, had researched how to avoid detection, had isolated Mary Jane from her family, had created false leads. Computer forensics expert Jeremy Smith testified about Christian's internet searches in the weeks before the tragedy. Sites about creating false identities, articles about how to disappear, forums discussing ways to avoid leaving evidence. Construction worker Mike Barker testified about encountering Christian on the bridge at 4:30 a.m. on December 17th. Described Christian as calm, collected, not panicked, not traumatized, just normal. He said his check engine light was on, Barker testified. He didn't seem upset, didn't seem scared, just wanted me to leave so he could handle it. The medical examiner testified about the condition of the remains when they were recovered. about the pillowcases weighted with rocks, about the suitcases designed to sink and stay hidden, about the fact that Zachary and Sadie had been alive when they entered the water. That detail broke the courtroom. Jurors cried, spectators gasped. Mary Jane's family sobbed openly. Christian sat emotionless. No tears, no visible reaction. The prosecution's closing argument was brutal. Deputy District Attorney Norm Frink didn't hold back. Christian Longo is a narcissist, a manipulator, a liar. He saw his family as obstacles to the life he wanted. So he removed them. Then he went on vacation. That's not a man who acted in rage. That's a man who made a calculated decision that his wife and children were disposable. After 4 hours of deliberation on April 7, 2003, the jury returned. Guilty on all 4 counts. The courtroom erupted. Christian showed no reaction. The sentencing phase began immediately. Now the jury had to decide, life in prison or the ultimate penalty. After 6.5 hours of deliberation on April 16, 2003, they reached their decision. The harshest sentence available under Oregon law. Christian Longo would spend the rest of his life paying for what he'd done. Christian Longo was sent to Oregon State Penitentiary. He sat there for years filing appeals. In 2011, he finally admitted responsibility for what happened. Confirmed he was a narcissist. But Oregon had stopped carrying out the harshest sentences in 1997. Then, in December 2022, Governor Kate Brown commuted the sentences of all 17 individuals awaiting the ultimate penalty to life imprisonment without parole. Mary Jane's sister, Penny Baker Dupuis, was devastated. She'd waited over 20 years for justice. Said Governor Brown should have consulted victims' families. As of 2025, Christian Longo is 51 years old. He's incarcerated at Oregon State Penitentiary, prisoner number 14509-855. He'll never be released. Will spend the rest of his life in prison. In 2005, the real Michael Finkel wrote a memoir about his bizarre relationship with Christian titled True Story. Finkel had visited Christian in jail multiple times. They'd exchanged over 1,000 pages of letters. Finkel admitted Christian had charmed him initially. But when Christian testified at trial, the friendship fell apart. Finkel realized he'd been manipulated like everyone else. In 2015, the book became a film starring James Franco as Christian and Jonah Hill as Finkel. Reports indicate Christian still calls Finkel monthly. Despite knowing better, Finkel usually answers. Even now, decades later, Christian is still trying to manipulate the one person who documented his crimes. Zachary would be 27 years old today. Sadie would be 26. Madison would be 25. They never got to grow up, never graduated high school, never fell in love, never had children of their own. Zachary was 4, loved playing with toys, was excited about kindergarten. Sadie was 3, sweet, energetic, followed her big brother everywhere. Madison was just 2, born premature, had fought so hard to survive, overcome respiratory problems. Mary Jane was 34. She'd forgiven Christian repeatedly, believed in him when no one else did. Her religion taught her to support her husband no matter what. Christian used that faith against her. She never got to see her children grow up, never got the peaceful life she'd worked so hard to build. The final truth. Christian Longo is a malignant narcissist. Someone who believes they're more important than everyone around them, who views other people as obstacles to be removed. When his life was collapsing, he didn't think about protecting his family. He thought about protecting his self-image, about not looking like the failure he'd become. He had options: divorce, bankruptcy, serving time for fraud, facing consequences like an adult. Instead, he chose the unthinkable. On December 16, 2001, Christian decided his family wasn't worth the inconvenience, wasn't worth the embarrassment, wasn't worth continuing to support. Then he went on vacation. Didn't spend weeks in guilt, didn't have nightmares, didn't break down emotionally. He packed a bag, stole another car, flew to Mexico, and started living his fantasy. Beach parties, romance, travel writing. While police recovered his children's remains from Oregon waters, Christian was drinking margaritas on the beach. While Mary Jane's family was planning a funeral for 4 people, Christian was journaling about his adventures. That's not a mental breakdown. That's calculated evil. When arrested, he lied again, blamed Mary Jane, created a narrative where he was the victim. Even after conviction, he continued playing victim. But here's the truth Christian will never admit. He valued his freedom more than his children's lives. He valued his self-image more than his wife's existence. He valued a fantasy about being a writer more than being a father. Mary Jane forgave him for embezzlement, stood by him when he was disfellowshipped, raised his children while he pursued his dreams, supported him through fraud charges and constant moves across the country. Christian repaid that loyalty by placing her in a suitcase and disposing of her in Yaquina Bay like she was garbage. Zachary was 4 years old, loved playing with toy cars, was excited about starting kindergarten, trusted his father completely. Sadie was 3 years old, sweet and energetic, followed her big brother everywhere, believed Daddy would always keep her safe. Madison was 2 years old, born premature, had fought so hard to survive those first weeks in the NICU. Overcome respiratory problems, learned to walk, started forming sentences. They never got to grow up, never graduated high school, never fell in love, never had children of their own, because their father decided they were inconvenient. Today, Christian Longo sits in Oregon State Penitentiary. He'll never be released. Will spend the next 30 or 40 years in a cell. And somewhere in his narcissistic mind, he probably still believes he's the real victim in this story. Still thinks if circumstances had been different, if Mary Jane had been more understanding, if the economy had been better, if the Jehovah's Witnesses hadn't disfellowshipped him, none of this would have happened. But circumstances don't harm children. People do. And Christian Longo harmed his children because maintaining his self-image mattered more than their lives. That's not tragedy. That's not mental illness. That's evil wearing a charming smile. May Mary Jane, Zachary, Sadie, and Madison rest in peace. May their memories be honored. And may their stories serve as a reminder that evil can hide behind the most perfect facade.